And now to the next in our series of community specials. ABC Canberra has spent the day in Tuggeranong listening to Your Stories. My colleague Dan Borscher is there, and Dan, it was once the growth centre of the capital, but lately we've heard a lot about Tuggeranong being the forgotten part of Canberra. Well, you and our colleagues, as I said, have been there all day. What have you been hearing?
Narda, good evening. Well, I've been hearing, much like you were when you were here today as well, that so many people feel as though they've been left out, that they haven't received the love that other parts of Canberra have, and that they want a bit more attention. The other side of that coin is, of course, those who were telling me that they're actually happy that they don't have politicians banging on their doors and wanting to be involved in everyday life here. So a bit of a balancing act, but you do get the sense that the solutions to the challenges here are very much in the minds of the community. And that's what Sarah Porter found, our reporter who's been reporting here.
They might look okay from a distance, but up close, it's a different story. It's not only the cracks across the surface that make these busy Caldwell netball courts a bit hard to handle.
During midwinter, you cannot get a colder place in Canberra. The wind rushes up the valley and the poor girls shiver away while they train and play here at the courts.
An indoor facility would really help us. Like, we would have a lot more players and our clubs would start to grow and we wouldn't have to worry about what the weather's doing anymore.
Southside community sporting groups have been trying to get a multi-sport indoor facility built on these courts for years.
Since about 2015, there's been 15 indoor courts lost on the south side as various areas have closed. Unfortunately, it means the demand on those small number of facilities that are left has increased and people are training in car parks.
Compared to investments being made in the north, Jonathan says his district is feeling somewhat forgotten.
My only observation is a bit of infrastructure envy when it comes to the south side here, because I think we haven't been receiving the same amount in recent years in terms of sporting infrastructure for the Tuggeranong Valley.
But it hasn't always been that way.
1973 saw the earth move in readiness for Tuggeranong.
During the 70s and 80s, development of the district was fast-paced.
The Tuggeranong Valley is an area full of natural beauty.
Prince Charles and Princess Diana were even invited to open Erindale Library as part of their 1983 royal tour. Families came from near and far to take advantage of the large blocks, new roads and the vast Hyperdome shopping mall.
I loved it. I loved it from the start.
Patricia and her family made Tuggeranong their home from the early 1980s.
It was a lovely place to bring children up. You could go for a drive into the country very quickly, and there was good school facilities here. The facilities for the schools were beautiful.
By the early 2000s, Tuggeranong's town centre was well established and suburbs, instead of paddocks, stretched down towards Tharwa. The demographics had also started to change.
The thing about Tuggeranong that I found went from Nappy Valley to being sort of the Battlers Valley, then the Forgotten Valley.
The scores of new apartments, coffee shops and bespoke children's areas around the now well-established lake tell a slightly different story. But long-time residents say public transport is now a disaster.
Let's go.
Taryn Langdon grew up in Tuggeranong and now advocates strongly for change, especially around public transport options from the far south of the district.
If we continue to, try and encourage active transport, we've got to make sure that it actually fits that 25-kilometre journey, not a 5-kilometre journey.
She also says the town centre could be more vibrant.
I think we need to really work with small business and work with the community to really make that a place where people want to come.
Despite some infrastructure envy and a need to change the public transport landscape, there is one thing Tuggeranong will always have over the north.
It's my pet love here, is whenever you drive out of here, when you're driving back, no matter what road you're on, you see the beautiful views of the Brindabellas. And thankfully they can't build that out, I don't think.
Sarah Porter, ABC News, Canberra.
Narda, as you heard there, so many came to Tuggeranong because of the lifestyle, the accessibility to nature and all the other trappings. They stayed because of the strong sense of community here and that being which binds them together. But it begs the question of what is the demography now here in Tuggeranong? Our data journalist Markus Mannheim has been looking into that. Markus, what have you found?
Well, Dan, this built-up town centre behind us is very much an exception. It doesn't reflect Tuggeranong. This is a valley of houses. It's the most spread-out district in Canberra by far. Most people who live here live on relatively large blocks of land compared with other Canberrans. And it's also essentially a finished town centre. It was built last century and it kind of reflects what mattered to people back then and what was important to people back then. Since then, in the last 20 years, Tuggeranong has not grown. So the rest of Canberra has, Dan, but the population here has actually been shrinking a little.
Markus, did you get a sense of the future for Tuggeranong?
Well, ACT planners tend to look about 40 years ahead to help prepare, and for the foreseeable future, they don't expect any significant changes at all in Tuggeranong. So no significant demographic changes and certainly no expansion. The rest of Canberra, of course, is growing, and it's growing relatively quickly, and it's growing in the way that cities tend to grow this century. So more townhouses, more apartments, less spread out suburbs. So that means we have a bit of stagnation here in Tuggeranong, which does create problems. But Dan, having talked to residents today, you kind of get a sense that they like Tuggeranong as it is, and there isn't a huge appetite for change.
Well, Markus, given those challenges, what do you see as the broader challenges ahead, but also the opportunities?
Well, if Tuggeranong is going to change economically, you have to change who lives here, and particularly the age of people who live here. It's never really had the big influx of people in their 20s that the rest of Canberra gets and relies on, students and young workers. They're the groups that tend to drive a lot of economic change and activity. How would you bring them here? It's a good question. Maybe a university in Tuggeranong would help. Maybe more big government workplaces would do it. Maybe, and this is actually on the horizon, the light rail, if it gets to the south, would transform the south in the way that it's transformed the north. But that's, of course, Dan, if it gets here.
Markus Mannheim, I suspect that's the question many are still wondering right now. Some of them came down to have a chat with us today, Narda, as you mentioned earlier, and that's exactly what this is about. We're reconnecting after a difficult 2020 to hear stories from our communities, and I'm going to be joining you and the whole team when we next head to Queanbeyan. Back to you.
And it looks cold down there, Dan. That's right. We will, on June the 9th, be taking a closer look at the issues affecting Queanbeyan. And if you're in Queanbeyan and have a story you'd like us to tell, please let us know by getting in touch via email on yourstoriescanberra@abc.net.au. One of Australia's most intriguing mysteries could